It was a crisp autumn evening when the Johnson family set up camp in a quiet, remote part of Pine Ridge Forest. The air smelled of pine needles and damp earth, and the sound of rustling leaves filled the otherwise still atmosphere. Tim, the father, had chosen this spot specifically for its peace and seclusion, far away from the busy trails and crowded campgrounds. His wife Claire and their two children, Emma and Ben, helped unpack the car, eager to settle into their tent before darkness fell. The family built a small fire, the flames dancing in the cool night air. They roasted marshmallows, laughed and shared stories, the crackling of the fire their only company. The woods, dense and vast, loomed around them in a thick embrace, but the family felt safe and content in the flickering warmth of their firelight. It wasn't until the fire had burned low, casting long shadows across the forest floor, that something felt off. Emma, who had been absent-mindedly poking the fire with a stick, looked up suddenly, her face pale in the flickering glow.
"Did you hear that?"
she whispered, her voice tight with unease. Claire turned toward her daughter. "What do you mean, honey?" I don't know," Emma said, squinting into the woods. "It's like footsteps. Like someone's walking out there." The sound of the crackling fire was the only noise at first. But then, there it was again. A soft, deliberate crunch of leaves, as though someone or something was moving just beyond the light's reach. Ben, the younger of the two children, tugged at Tim's sleeve. "Dad, what is that?" Tim stood up, his sense of unease prickling his skin. He glanced around, his eyes scanning the dark outline of trees at the edge of their camp. "Probably just an animal," he said, trying to reassure his family. "Maybe a deer or a raccoon." But the rustling grew louder, closer. And it wasn't the random shuffle of leaves from an animal searching for food. The steps were too rhythmic, too purposeful. Tim's eyes narrowed. Claire stood up, pulling Emma close. "Maybe we should go inside the tent for a bit," she suggested, her voice trying to sound calm but betraying a hint of fear. But Ben's eyes were wide as he pointed toward the trees. "Look!" A shadow darted between two trees, just a fleeting blur, but enough to send a chill through the entire family. No one had passed by their camp since they arrived. And this figure, if it had been a person, had been too quick, too stealthy to be anything normal. Tim felt his heart begin to race. He motioned for everyone to stay still. "Stay close," he murmured. "I'll go check it out." The forest around them fell silent, as though holding its breath. Tim grabbed a flashlight and cautiously approached the edge of the camp. His senses on high alert, his footsteps crunched in the leaves, but all he could hear now was the beating of his own heart. The flashlight flickered briefly, then illuminated the dark shapes of the trees. Nothing. He swung the beam back and forth, scanning for any sign of movement, but the forest remained still, unnaturally so. The rustling had stopped. Tim stood there for a long moment, listening for any sound, but all he could hear now was the wind through the branches. Tim turned back to the camp. "It's nothing," he called, though his voice was more strained than he intended. The moment he turned, a low, guttural sound came from behind him, a scraping noise like something dragging against bark. Tim froze, the flashlight trembling in his hand. Then, a voice, a whisper so soft it could have been carried by the wind, came from the trees. "Leave." It was faint but unmistakable. His breath caught in his throat. He spun around, his eyes darting wildly. Claire, Emma, and Ben were still by the fire, watching him with wide, fearful eyes. The forest had gone deathly quiet once more. "Dad?" Ben asked, his voice small. Tim slowly began to back toward the camp, his hand gripping the flashlight so hard his knuckles turned white. "We need to pack up," he said, his voice low but firm. "Now." Claire's face drained of color as she grabbed the kids, her voice trembling. "What's happening?" Tim didn't have time to explain. He didn't know, but something was wrong. The feeling of being watched was suffocating, like eyes were boring into him from every angle. The air had shifted, charged with an unnatural energy. "Stay close," he ordered, hurrying back to the tent. He could feel the shadows closing in on them, something unseen and malevolent, moving just beyond the firelight. As they packed in a frantic rush, the whispering grew louder, clearer. "Leave, or suffer." Tim could hear the faint crackle of something, or someone, moving swiftly through the underbrush, just beyond the reach of the firelight. The air grew heavier with each passing second, like the forest itself was pressing in around them. They didn't even finish packing the tent. Tim grabbed the car keys and, without looking back, ushered his family toward the vehicle. As they stumbled toward the car, Emma looked over her shoulder one last time. In the distance between the trees, something shifted, a figure standing still, watching. Without a word, Tim slammed the car door shut and they drove away, hearts pounding, the forest fading behind them. As they passed the edge of the woods, Claire's trembling voice broke the silence. "Do you think it was a person?" Tim shook his head, his hands tight on the steering wheel. "I don't know, but I don't think we were meant to be there." The rest of the night was spent in silence, each of them trying to shake the feeling that they hadn't just left the forest behind, but something else.